Welcome to today's webinar, Indoor Navigation, Results of the FCC's CSRIC Bay Area Trials, brought to you by GPS World and Platinum sponsor Hemisphere. I'm Bethany Chambers from North Coast Media, publisher of GPS World magazine, and I will be your event manager. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. The recording will be available 2 weeks from today on our website at gpsworld.com/webinars. A link to the on-demand recording will also be emailed to you when it is available. At this time, I'd like to acquaint you with the ways in which you can participate during today's presentation. Please notice in the lower left-hand corner of your console that there is a Submit button. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Just type in the text box at the bottom left, then click Submit to place your question in queue. Many of the questions that were submitted during registration will be covered in this webinar. Some questions may also be answered in an upcoming issue of GPS World magazine or in one of our many e-newsletters. We strive to answer as many of your questions as possible. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, select Help to submit your issue, and Assistant Producer Rick Aldrich or I will personally assist you. Now I'd like to turn today's event over to our moderator, GPS World editor and publisher, Alan Cameron.
Hi everyone. Welcome to the GPS World Market Insights webinar. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Hemisphere GNSS. For those of you who are acquainted with the company, you'll know that Hemisphere is not primarily, or perhaps not at all, an indoor company. However, they are very interested in the results that we're going to be discussing, as will all as should be, I should say, all outdoor users of GNSS, and I'll return to that topic in a moment. Today we have 4 speakers, all of whom were closely involved in the FCC CSRIC Bay Area trials, and they're each going to tell you about those trials from their own perspective. First of all, we have Khaled Dessouky from Technicom, who administered or managed the trials and largely wrote the report of the trials. Then we have Ganesh Pattabiraman from NextNav and Norm Shaw from Polaris Wireless. These 2 companies participated in the trials. Their technologies were tested. And finally, we have Greg Turetsky from CSR. CSR was closely involved in the whole process, chose not to participate in this stage of the testing for reasons that Greg will go into. I think that each of these individuals has unique and valuable insights into the whole process and into the developing frontier, the frontier that is fast being pushed out in indoor navigation. Now, I want to make clear, and perhaps Khaled will add to this, the intended scope of this effort that we're talking about is not so much for indoor navigation generally or for location-based services. There are obviously implications for those, but the intended scope of this effort was for emergency calls, for E911 calls placed over cell phones. This is becoming increasingly prevalent, increasingly common for emergency calls to be placed from within buildings, and first responders need to know exactly where to go in order to reach the person in an emergency. So the intent, the express purpose of these trials was to find and accumulate information for the Federal Communications Commission to make regulations governing the use of cell phones and equipment for emergency calls. Now, there will be ultimately implications of those regulations for cell phone use generally and for such things as location-based services that will come out of them. Also, there will be implications for companies and the use of GNSS outdoors, as many outdoor uses are applied indoors. But again, the specific focus of what we're going to talk about is emergency E911. And with that, I'd like to turn it over in just a moment. I'll have one final thing to say. and that is that, again, you are encouraged to submit questions during the webinar. We'll get to as many as we can. You'll hear from the four speakers. They each have about 8 to 10 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer series at the end. Now I'd like to turn the podium over to Khaled Dasuki of Technicom Corporation. Take it away, Khaled.
Thank you, Alan, very much for this excellent introduction. This really places things in the proper context. As Alan mentioned, the objective here really was to help provide the FCC with information that it can use in articulating its policy going forward regarding whether it should put regulations on location technologies used for 911 purposes, and if so, when, in what time frame, based on what performance, and so on and so forth. With that in mind, the FCC about a year and a half ago commissioned CSRIC 3 and Working Group 3 within CSRIC was set specifically to answer a number of difficult questions related to performance of 911 and more specifically performance of location technologies when used for 911 from indoor settings. We provided answers to these questions in a report that was prepared in May of 2012. But a common thread through most of these answers was, well, we really need to get more reliable, unbiased information about the performance of location technologies when used in realistic indoor environments. And so the step that followed, starting in the summer of last year, was to put together the framework to pull that off. And there was a significant number of location technologies to be investigated, and a significant number of wireless carriers involved. And it was a very significant challenge, obviously, to put together a framework that would work within the available time for the commission of CSRIC 3, which ended in early March. So that we had about 7-8 months to do all of the above. And through the dedication of everybody involved in this effort, as well as the knowledge that we had working with each other through other forums such as ATIS and ESIF and so on, we were able to make this happen. So we started with as I have in the chart here, 7 vendors that were expressed interest, and then for one reason or another, we ended up testing 3 technologies, 2 existing technologies, one from Qualcomm, which is the familiar AGPS AFLT hybrid, one from Polaris Wireless, the RF pattern matching, and a newer one from NextNav, which is the wireless beacon technology. There were 4 wireless carriers involved, and all of them participated and provided access to their infrastructure in the sense that test calls were placed on their networks, and to get a very broad representation of actual performance. We, Technicom, were hired to do this testing, and I'll just, in the next chart here, I will just say a few things about us. We've been involved in this business for about 18 years. Our earliest inputs to the FCC were critical in actually formulating the requirements for outdoor 911. And since then, we've been doing work for a wide number of wireless location technology vendors as well as wireless carriers. But we decided to adopt a location technology neutral approach in our business. So we focus on the performance monitoring and the service assurance of 911. We have various solutions that embody our experience and that are deployed widely in many wireless carrier networks and protected by our portfolio of intellectual property in that area. We've also been involved, and that really proved to be very important for our role in CSRIC. We've been involved since 2003 in the process of creating the methodologies for testing 911, whether that's outdoors or indoors. And I personally played a big role in writing the methodology that became an industry standard and that really helped in pushing things forward within the CSRIC framework. So just to follow on what I was saying, the methodology is based on what we had developed within ATIS and in the ESIF committees. And the test, it's not really practical to test indoor location in every PSAP. Indoor testing is expensive, complicated, resource intensive. So the approach is to test it in representative environments. And that's basically what we did. We chose, first of all, we had to choose a representative area to do the testing in. We'll get to that in a second. We tested in 19 buildings in the Bay Area across the range of environments, from dense urban, tall high-rises, to urban, where the structure density is pretty high, but not necessarily skyscrapers, to suburban environments, and to the rural morphologies where it's pretty low density, cell sites are sparse, and the buildings are quite far apart.
Hi, Khaled. This is Bethany joining the line here for a moment. We are having some technical difficulties with the slides. We are getting your questions from the audience. Thank you for letting us know. And we will pause for just a moment while we try to get those slides back up live for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, while we wait for the slides to come back online, I thought I might just insert a few comments. This is Alan Cameron from GPS World. We've gotten a number of questions come in previous to the webinar, and I'd just like to address a couple of them. One person asks which is the most promising solution, and somebody else wants to know who will win. Well, at the moment we and the FCC and all the participants are not so much interested in winning, who's going to win, and I don't think in the end there will be a winner as such. We're interested in exploring the technologies and what they're capable of and what is going to be the most promising solution, again, for emergency calling. There are a number of location-based services applications already fielded, and they will continue to be fielded using different technologies, and probably the market will be the determiner of who will win or what will win. The intent of this study, and again, we're only in the first stage. There will be continued trials. There will be a next stage of testing and so forth. These are to determine the emergency calling technology. There will be implications of that for location-based services and for the use of GNSS indoor generally. But I think it's a bit early to be trying to determine who will win or what is the most promising solution.
Hi, Alan. This is Bethany again joining the call. It looks like it is a problem with our slides. Perhaps we could do a few Q&A questions from our registration period while they get those slides back up. Our technical support is on that right now.
Okay, I'll go ahead with another question that came in. Again, this is reaching beyond the immediate intent of the study. Everybody wants to know what's next. But one person has written in to ask, how close is the technology to operational use by consumers? I'd like to throw it open to any of the participants. Obviously, there is some indoor location capability currently. It's just not the same as outdoors. Would any of our speakers care to answer the question, how close is the technology to operational use by consumers?
Alan, this is Ganesh from NextNav. Maybe I can take a stab at that question. So I think the answer to that question really depends on the technology. There are different technologies in different stages of development. Indoor is obviously a very new paradigm that we're all in the industry working hard to figure out a solution to. There are certain technologies already in that people have been using in the combination of using GPS and assist AFLT kinds of techniques. And there are other approaches using Wi-Fi, for instance, that people have played with. But obviously, I don't think we've got the silver bullet yet that solves the problem. So there are many approaches that are being worked on. We, for instance, NextNav, have a different approach and solution to solving this problem, and we think we've come up with a different mousetrap that has some potential. But it is in the early stages of commercialization. So I think it comes down to sort of the need and the technology that's being used, and there are many technologies that people have played with. And I think the answer to indoor is not complete yet, and I think there is a lot of more technologies in development.
Yeah, so Alan, this is Greg Turetsky. I think I'd also add what we're talking about today is the report that's around the indoor testbed methodology and the report that came out of that. There was a second report that was published on the exact same day, which was also coming out of the same working group, which was on this, and the title of that report was Leveraging LBS. And that's really, I think, what the question boils down to, which is, from a consumer standpoint, there are consumer applications that are available for indoor technology today. We all use them all the time on our phones. The issue here is, how do we make those technologies work in E911? And so there are two kind of things that we're trying to answer there as part of the CSRIC. One is, what were we able to test today? And the other one being, what is commercially available and how does that impact what E911 might look like in the future? So the other report is equally interesting, just focused in a little bit different way.
And I would add, Alan, this is Norman, to what Greg and Ganesh had just said, that I believe what the first indoor report gives us is a benchmark, if you will. This is where we see things at this time. Obviously, there's a lot of technologies, even deployed technologies, that were not able to participate in the first phase of this test. And to Greg's point, we've identified numerous LBS technologies and other advanced technologies that could be brought to bear to address these issues. I think the important thing to note is that we have a start, we have a beginning place, we have now established where we are, but that the intent of all involved within CSRIC is that this type of testing needs to continue. We need to bring in a broader array of technologies. We need to marry different technologies together, and that we need to use what we've got today as the beginning and then see how much we can drive further and further improvements in accuracy. Because, and I know there's people in the audience who have been involved in location for a while, we've talked for a long time about 50 meters being sort of the standard. If you can give somebody 50-meter accuracy everywhere, now you really have an application, something to work with. But I think those of us involved in the CSRIC group found that certainly for public safety, the requirements were much, much more exact than that. So I believe that this is going to be a process that we're going to need to take over time, where we measure our improvement over the baseline that we've set here in this report.
Right, which also I think comes back. I thought the title, by the way, of the webinar was interesting in the sense that it says, the CSRIC Bay Area trials, which would maybe indicate that there are going to be some other trials, but there some other trials in some other place. But the intent of the CSRIC was to establish the Bay Area testbed and have future trials take place in the same testbed. So, it's not the Bay Area testbed, it is the CSRIC testbed.
Yeah, I think the word trial is perhaps a little bit of a misnomer. It was a testbed, and its objective was to get a baseline performance. And that's what we have right now. Of course, within the context of the sample that was used for the testing. A broader sample may give you somewhat different results, but not by much, really.
Yeah, and the intent of the trials, or one of the intents, is to determine the capabilities for the various methodologies or any other methodologies that may come into the process at a later stage, to determine vertical accuracy as well as horizontal accuracy. Emergency responders need to know not only what address to go to, but which floor of the building to go to in the case of high-rises, for example, or even just a 3- or 4-story building. So the testbed involves a wide variety of building types, from single-level home structures to 3- and 4-story buildings to the stereotypical downtown high-rise building. And the results of the report indicate that there are varying success rates depending on a whole number of factors. In fact, it found that almost each individual building, not even building types, but individual buildings, posed different challenges and yielded different effects for the various technologies. Now I'm hearing from Bethany that we have the slides displaying again. I'm going to turn it briefly back to Bethany, and then Khalid will resume with his webinar, with his presentation. And I'm going to assume, Bethany, that we will be able to run over our time to compensate for the lost time so far.
Hi, Alan. Yes, we will be running over a little bit on today's presentation. Some folks may have lost audio or slides for a moment. If you did have that, my apologies for the disruption. Please log out and log back in with the URL you got in your email from us and from On24, and we should be back up and running with slides and audio for everyone at this point. And if you do experience any more technical difficulties, please do let us know so that we can take care of them immediately. And with that said, I will turn it back over to Khaled. Feel free to queue up the slides you need and continue with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bethany. So according to the screen in front of me, we're looking right now at some sample buildings from the Bay Area, showing pictures of buildings that are in a dense urban environment, and the San Francisco urban is pretty heavy urban, suburban and rural. Let me first go back one slide to talk about the methodology of testing in representative environments, and then we'll move back forward again. So I'm going to go to the previous. Okay. So what we did is we went and defined polygons or perimeters, if you will, within downtown San Francisco, downtown San Jose, Santa Clara County, and further south to capture the dense urban, suburban, and rural environments. The use of the words environments and morphologies are interchangeable. And the methodology rests on selecting representative buildings within each such environment, and within each building selecting an appropriate number of points that represent different use cases within that building. For example, first floor, high floor, outside room, deep inside room, and so on. And the key is to place enough calls at each test point that you have a statistically significant result at that test point. And we ended up collecting a very large number of test calls from 74 test points spread among these 19 buildings. Why 19 buildings? Then was an excellent trade-off between how long it would take to do this test bed stage one, how much it would cost, and whether the results would be wide and broad enough to be statistically representative. I think we have results that are very statistically representative. So 19 turned out to be a very good, very good solution in the end. Because this is a test bed, if you will, benchmark process, we decided to get ground truth indoors with a lot of accuracy. The survey team that we hired surveyed the indoor points to 2 centimeter accuracy. Of course, when you have a field team of technicians putting on a cart with devices on it, they're not going to be that accurate. So the accuracy, the practical accuracy, is within 1 meter. 1 meter really has essentially no impact on the overall quality of the accuracy results that were obtained at the end of the test bed. We tested accuracy, yield, whether the call made it to the 911 system and yielded a result of coordinates X, Y, the time to first fix, how did the uncertainty reported parameter look like, and how did the results look in the way they were scattered about the true ground truth. Because indoor, again, is different from outdoor. In outdoor, if you have an emergency that's 50 meters away or 75 meters away, you can probably see where the emergency is. In indoor, a similar distance may put you in a building across the street or in a different block that is accessed from an entirely different side of the building. So the things that we've known all along from outdoor don't necessarily apply directly from outdoor, don't apply directly to indoor. But they are, benchmarks that just one should keep in mind. So I now change slides to show the sample examples of these buildings. And as Alan alluded to, in the dense urban environment, there was primarily high-rise buildings. In the urban environment in San Francisco, there was a wide range of structures. Some of them looked like this picture here of a motel or a small hotel in a row of buildings. Another one was a courthouse, an old-fashioned courthouse that's actually a historic landmark. Another one was the convention center. Another one was AT&T baseball park. A third one was a tall, 22-story high urban building in downtown San Jose. So it was a very wide and diverse sample, which showed, as Alan was saying, that even each building has its own idiosyncrasies and affects performance in its own unique little way. Of course, we aggregate the results and present aggregate results in the end, because that's how we can draw broad conclusions. So as I said, we looked at, before I talk a little bit about accuracy, and I'm going to defer to some extent to my colleagues, the other speakers here, to talk a little bit more about their performance. Yield has always been a concern for indoor calls. Yes, you may get decent performance, but maybe only 20% of the calls come up with a result when you're calling from deep indoor. Well, that's really not what we found. We found that yield was not an issue, that greater than 90% of the calls resulted in yield. One minor exception was AGPS AFLT in the dense urban environment, where it was only about 86%. Keep in mind here, and I need to clarify that of the three technologies that we had, only one of them, AGPS AFLT, was the one that's truly integrated completely into the wireless network and has to support all the message exchanges over the standard interfaces, for example, to provide assistance data and deliver results. The two other technologies, the technology from Polaris and NextNav, were not really integrated into the network, and therefore they didn't have to cope as much with the fact that you have to exchange messages to support a 911 call transaction while you're deep indoor, attenuated by many walls and floors. Nevertheless, the results for yield were quite encouraging. The time to first fix was not found to be a significant issue. In the cases of NextNav and Polaris, it was very much around the design point. Again, that has to do more with the fact that they're not fully integrated into the network, therefore those numbers are somewhat idealistic and by design. The case of AGPS AFLT, which was fully integrated into the network, of course showed some variation depending on how severe the environment was in. Nevertheless, the results were around 30 seconds in urban and dense urban environments. 90% of the calls came in within 33 seconds in the urban and dense urban cases, and within 26 seconds for the suburban and rural cases. So the performance overall was pretty good. When we calculated the yield, we used all the calls that resulted in a location fix. We did not cut it off at some arbitrary number like 30 seconds or something like that. The reported uncertainty parameter is still a useful parameter, but it needs to be interpreted in the context of indoor performance. Whenever the location system is performing well, usually uncertainty is reliable in telling you this is a good quality call or not so good quality location fix. When the system is performing poorly, for example, in a deep, harsh indoor environment, the uncertainty values are not very useful. And that's really an intuitive result, and it's consistent with our understanding. Moving next. I know this chart is probably a little bit difficult to see, but I recommend that our audience go back to the report that's been filed with the FCC from CSRIC Working Group 3 and the much more detailed report that Technocom provided to CSRIC Working Group 3, and I know that a copy of that is still available on our FTP site that's written at the end of the working group report submitted to the FCC, if it's not within the FCC's website itself. In any case, you can see that the performance generally was the worst in an urban environment, followed closely by a dense urban environment. And perhaps the reason for that is the specific buildings that were used in the urban environments that I was telling you about, these really difficult buildings. In dense urban, even though you get a lot of fallback fixes, there's a higher cell site density. Cell sites are maybe a quarter mile apart or even closer than that. So there is a little bit better cushioning, if you will, with the fallback fixes when you don't have the primary mode, such as GPS, for example. And it's a tighter environment. You can get better calibration for RF fingerprinting and so on. So dense urban didn't turn out to be the worst case. Urban turned out to be the worst case. And again, keep in mind, this is urban in San Francisco. Urban in another city may be a little bit more forgiving than this urban. Performance was significantly better in a suburban environment where the buildings are smaller, not too many floors to go through, not too many walls to go through, and as expected. And beyond that, which is not shown here, the rural performance was pretty good, roughly comparable to suburban performance. And I'm sure Ganesh will talk to you about the vertical performance that was observed for NextNav. NextNav provided good, in my opinion, vertical performance for this generation of their system. 90%, as you see in that small table in the corner, 90% of the results were more or less within one floor, which is really a major advancement compared to where we are now, which is really no information about where you are in height. Let me, in the interest of time, move to the next chart here, which is some quick conclusions. Through the hard work of everybody, we were really able were successful in showing that the cooperative funding of such a test bed is a viable framework. Next time we do it, hopefully within the context of a future CSRIC to be commissioned by the FCC, we'll have some tweaks to simplify the processes. The biggest challenges, which were setting up a project with so many participants, whether they're technology companies or wireless carriers, and the issue of building access. It's always a challenge to access buildings indoors and educate the people that this is for the public good, this is not going to reflect badly on you in any way, this is something good, you should have support us in doing that. This is really a lot more challenging than appears from a bullet. Believe me, that was a big deal. The Bay Area turned out to be a really good environment that captures the range from dense urban all the way to rural, and it should be leveraged in the future since we've done a lot of homework on it already. And in terms of performance, existing location technologies provide helpful information on where you are indoors, but it's probably not accurate enough to tell you where you are exactly indoors. And the newer technology, such as the beacon from NextNav, performs better, but it still is a long process to get to some of the lofty expectations that some in the emergency community may have of, I'd like to find you in not only what floor, but also what suite and preferably what room. Well, we're not there yet, obviously. If you read the report and see the performance, there is potential, and we're moving in the right direction, and we have a benchmark, but this is still a long road that we have to go through. And there are new technologies that we should add to the list of technologies that we were not able to test in stage 1 because of time and logistics, which include, of course, those technologies that are being used for LDS when applied to a 911 context, as well as newer generations of systems and new technologies that are being targeted to things like LTE, for example. I think this concludes my remarks for now. So back to you, Alan.
Thank you, Khaled. Before I turn it over to Ganesh Pattabiraman from NextNav, I want to tell everyone in the audience that you can, if you don't already have a copy, you can download the full report, the full CSRIC testbed report. Look on the left-hand side of your screen. You'll see something that says "Read the report," and you can get the full document there. It includes the charts that Khaled showed just previously, along with several hundred, or perhaps just maybe 100 other charts and figures with detailed results from the trials. And I also want to let everyone know that we will go past the top of the hour, which is coming up in another 20 minutes. We will go past that time to make sure that all of our speakers are able to make their full presentation. Now over to Ganesh Pattabiraman, co-founder, president, and chief operating officer of NextNav. Ganesh.
Thanks, Alan. Hopefully everybody can hear me, and I'm going to try and push the slide. Hopefully you see the change slide. So my name is Ganesh, and NextNav, what I'd like to do is walk everyone through a little bit of background about who we are, since we are the new location player or provider in this space, and then get into a little bit of the CSRIC test results and where do we go from here type of questions. So fundamentally, we are a service provider of high precision location services. So although we have developed the core technology and built the boxes, but we actually are a service provider who is deploying and managing and running the terrestrial beacon network that allows for good indoor performance. The way we do this is by actually owning a near nationwide wireless spectrum, and that allows us to deploy and radiate terrestrial signals which have good indoor penetration properties. We are venture funded and have raised a large amount of capital from Columbia Capital, Telecom Ventures, and Goldman Sachs. And the team itself, we've actually got a very interesting mix of folks with deep location background and wireless services background. So we've got, I've been in the location space pretty much, interestingly, my entire career, starting with satellite-based positioning systems to more recently managing some location products at Qualcomm previously. But we've got folks like Dr. Norm Krasner, who is the founder and CTO of SnapTrack, which pioneered assisted GPS on our advisory board, and Gary Parsons, who is the founder, chairman of XM Satellite Radio, who's built half a dozen terrestrial networks nationwide, part of our team. So a very rich and diverse team that we think we've put together that can truly develop, build, and scale the technology to the commercial requirements. So fundamentally, what do we have? We have developed, so how do we really achieve the high precision, consistent, and reliable 3D positioning? The way we do it is by building a terrestrial constellation from the ground up, and that was the fundamental thesis behind how we started, was that you had to, like GPS, have a dedicated terrestrial network if you were to achieve the consistency, reliability, and precision in indoor environments. And combining signals or signals of opportunity don't always give you the best results. And the way we do this is we have an overlay network with wireless beacons that surround a metropolitan area and radiate a GPS-like signal, which can actually, which has very little impact on the digital portions of a receiver, but does require support on the RF chain because we are transmitting on a different frequency band. The beacons themselves are highly synchronized, similar to GPS, and they're actually we actually place these beacons with the view to optimizing GDOP and knowing exactly where the towers are and cable length, etc. So taking into account all the various factors that are critical in developing and designing a positioning system, and so. The whole idea is that if you start off with a good starting point, then the end result will also be good. And I think the CSRIC tests sort of bore those facts out. Because we look and feel like a terrestrial constellation, we're actually able to reuse a lot of the plumbing that has already been put in place for GNSS-like constellations. So, for instance, a lot of the message flows and information exchange that currently happens for GNSS constellation over the communication channels can be reused to a large extent. And there's some support required for a new constellation, but that's pretty much the level that's required. On the device side, there is, again, like I mentioned, very minimal impact because the signal we radiate is actually very much GPS-like, and therefore there's minimal impact on that front. The other unique thing we developed, because knowing the challenges of location and the economics around it, is that this is a shared network. So very much like GPS, this is a network that is shared across multiple parties. It's a broadcast network. And the whole idea is that the costs and et cetera can be amortized, and therefore the competitiveness of the solution could be comparable or if not better than some of the other indoor location technologies that are available or being developed right now. So those were some of the elements or thought processes that went into developing the technology. And a result of that is that we are able to give you very good 2D positioning like GPS, in the 20-meter type or better type of range. We are able to give you that consistently and precisely over the entire network that we are operating in. And we also have significant advantages when it comes to other parameters of location the system in terms of the time to get a position fix for us with this network is in the order of 5 to 6 seconds. And as a result, the power consumption also we expect to be significantly better than GPS. So I think with that development, we're comprehensively able to deliver on not just the 2D positioning, but also some of the other elements that are critical for in any location system, such as power, yield, time to first fix, etc. In addition to that, we're also I believe the only wide area or metropolitan area system that can give you vertical, and we were able to deliver, as Khalid said, nearly 90% of the time across a metropolitan area about floor level precision, which is a tremendous step forward compared to where we are right now, where we don't have very good vertical information, but also in the indoor environments it's extremely critical. and something that I think most folks and first responders have indicated as a very desirable element to have. The other factor to keep in mind is that we expect to essentially coexist with GPS in the sense that we're deploying and building the network in places where GPS is challenged, the urban areas, the downtowns, and the suburban areas where GPS signals cannot penetrate inside. But in the very rural areas, we don't expect very heavy deployment, primarily because GPS does such a wonderful job of providing you that precision in all those environments. So I think overall, we think we've sort of built the system with the key principles or elements required for a good positioning system, and now these results have borne fact to that thesis. I'm not going to go through too many of the other two slides that describe the technology that is available for your reference, but I think I went over some of the key factors or design principles that went into developing the system. So as Khalid and Alan indicated, we were one of the 3 participants in the CSRIC testbed that was put together, I would say, over the last year and a half, and concluded in March of this year with the report being submitted to the FCC. And there were 3 technologies that were tested. And all I would say is, as one of the participants in the testbed process, that Khalid really put us all through the ringer. So it was by no means a very straightforward, simple test. There were many parameters that went into the definition of the test and what was required of the various parties in complying with the requirements on a handset basis to ensure that it mimics a real handset. We tested in various buildings, high-rises, and parking garages. And so it was quite a rigorous testing protocol that I think everybody agreed at the end of it was that the data was very comprehensive, reliable, and met the parameters of the FCC's requirements on how this data should be captured. Oops, I think I went to the wrong slide here. Okay, so what were the results at the end of the testbed process? As we mentioned, 3 companies participated, and these are the not the CDS, but the 67th and 90th% positioning error results from all the different technologies. And this is a snapshot of what was presented in the CSRIC report. So I would urge everybody to look at that report. Fundamentally, the shorter bar is a better bar because it's tied to accuracy. And there are 2 lines indicated here, the 67th percentile and the 90th percentile. These 2 numbers are important from the FCC's perspective because they indicate the performance metric that the FCC had set out for the current outdoor requirements in terms of accuracy numbers. And so everybody in the industry measures their performance compared to those 2 metrics. And the idea is that what percentage of position fixes fell within, X meters 67% of the times and Y meters the other portion of the time. And the numbers right now are 50 meters and 150 meters are the thresholds that the FCC has defined for outdoor, and the numbers for indoor are TBD at this point. But the key things here is, I think everybody should look at is some of the numbers which are important are the 50-meter threshold, which the public safety group has indicated is sort of their cutoff point. The results here show the performance in 4 different environments. I think I'll let Norm speak, but both Norm and NextNav, Polaris and NextNav tested their technologies on a standalone basis, and Qualcomm's technology was hybridized between GPS and AFLT and cell sector. So it's a cumulative result there. Our performance in the dense urban and urban areas was around 50 to 55 meters, 67% of the time in those environments. And in the suburban and rural, suburban is a lot of Silicon Valley type of areas, and rural was out in the Gilroy areas, we were within the 50 meters 90% of the time. And so you can see that the performance was significantly better in those kinds of conditions. But I think pretty representative of what we saw or saw earlier based on our own internal testing. The other factor that is important to consider is that we were the only company to have tested the vertical. And this is something that we actually have spent considerable amount of time developing over the last couple of years. And the tests, thanks to Khalid's team measuring the ground truth down to meter level or centimeters, the overall performance was well in line with our expectation, in that on an average vertical height error we saw was around 2 meters. And these two charts show the user experience on the left when a person is walking down a flight of stairs or going on an elevator, and tracking over time how that performance looked. The way we achieve vertical performance is really by using augmentation using MEMS pressure sensors, because the positioning systems which are ground-based or even satellite-based are not good at resolving vertical that precisely. And so what we have is that the pressure sensors that are incorporated into devices are really good at absolute but do not know relatively where they are and what the ambient pressure and temperature is, and therefore are not able to precisely calibrate the vertical information. Because when there is a pressure change, it is impossible for the device to know whether the pressure changed because of the ambient pressure and temperature changes, or was it because of the physical movement of the sensor as you moved from one floor to the other. And so to address that, what we have is in all our beacons, we have pressure sensors that transmit the ambient information that allows the device to correct itself and give you a very precise vertical information. So I think overall that technique we feel has borne out in several of these environments quite well. So then the question is, these are the results, and this has come at a lot of work, but where do we go from here? Well, here's some background information around mobile 911 trends. Basically, since the time that mobile has become prevalent in the mid-90s to now, there's been a tremendous movement in terms of the number of people who are using mobile phones for their day-to-day communication. There's nearly 36% of households, as per the latest CDC reports, that do not even have a landline. So the only way they communicate is using mobile phones. The number of 911 calls from mobiles is only increasing. There's about 145 million 911 calls annually. That's about more than 400,000 on a daily basis. And 70% of the 911 calls are actually wireless. So the 150 million represents about 70% of those calls. And so the numbers are only increasing. And as per sort of the analysis or the data that we have from some of the external parties like J.D. Power, nearly 60% of calls originate from indoor locations. Now, we don't know the exact percentage of 911 calls from indoors, but I think that is immaterial whether it's a 40% or 50%. The fact is the number of calls is actually quite large. So I think from that perspective, a lot of work needs to happen, and that's why this is a prime focus for the FCC in going forward. As we've indicated earlier, we've gone through an extensive process over the last 2 years or 18 months in getting to this point. The FCC created the CSRIC Work Group 3 in fall of 2011, and we've actually written up 3 separate reports on 911 and what do we do with location. But the work is not complete. This is we're halfway through the point, and now it's really at the point where the policymakers get involved in trying to take the data, which we all agree is comprehensive, and then determine the next steps. And we think the next steps are actually within the current time horizon of this year and early next year, where there will probably be an FNPRM or Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that will come up, where the public safety and the operators and all the stakeholders will get involved, and then that will be followed by a report and order from the FCC on what we think would be sort of desired goals for the wireless operators to meet. And so what does a performance metric, et cetera, look like in this? I think nobody really knows. But I think what we know from the first responders or the public safety comments in the CSRIC report was that, for them, what they really want to do is dispatch people to the correct building and floor of a building. Short of that, their desired goal is as tight a search ring as possible, because anything that becomes hundreds of meters, the value reduces because there is the perception of that the best outcome of saving lives happens in the first, the golden hour, and you have to find people precisely in order to help them in that first initial period of time. And so that is something that we don't know what the numbers will look like, but we know from the first responders that the the 50-meter cutoff threshold is important, and anything outside of that becomes less interesting. Then the other factor that they have indicated is that the precise floor level information will also be very important. Because in an indoor environment, as we all said, it's very different from outdoors. If you're not able to precisely tell people which floor they're on, then you lose the ability to actually find them, because if you think about a 100-story building, finding people precisely can be a large task that any first responder has to take on. So a number of different elements come into play. We don't know what the exact answer will be, but I think this is the first report that has actually been put together that lays out the public safety's desire on what they would seek in any indoor mandate, and we actually now have comprehensive data that the FCC, unbiased comprehensive data that the FCC can really look at and make a determination. So in conclusion, I would say, overall, I think the CSRIC testbed that we created was a tremendous success. It's never been done, an exercise of this magnitude, where we've got many different location technologies tested in parallel to really create an unbiased record on what is possible. And I think the other key things that have been demonstrated is that there are several viable indoor location technologies that can deliver precise indoor positioning. 3 were tested in the CSRIC testbed, and the LBS report that we mentioned a little earlier cites an additional number of technologies that can be tested. The other thing I think everybody would agree is that outdoor rules do not really work in indoor environments, and it is something that I think the FCC will have to take into account, and the public safety folks have clearly expressed their desire for 50 meters or better precision and floor level in order to work for indoor environments. And finally, I think now we have comprehensive, like I said, unbiased, actionable data, and we hope to see some constructive action from the FCC as next steps. And with that, I will hand back to Alan.
All right. Thank you, Ganesh. I want to tell everybody that we have run past. You'll obviously notice our schedule time, but we are going to go for another 25 minutes, excuse me, to be sure to give time for Norm Shaw from Polaris Wireless and Greg Turetsky from CSR to give their presentations. I want to thank everyone in the audience for their patience. It looks like we are holding steady with a full attendance. So, Norm, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Alan. And welcome, everyone. I will try to be brief as, obviously this is running on a bit. I am with Polaris Wireless. Polaris is a deployed technology that operates using RF pattern matching. We utilize measurement reports that are generally used within a cellular system to assist the handsets in making handoff decisions, et cetera, and leverage that information to perform the location of the phone itself. One of the important aspects of our technology is that it operates without any changes to the handset or ramifications on the carrier network, and I will elaborate on that a little bit later as I move into my slide deck. But first, what I'd like to talk about is how we got here and why the testbed conducted by CSRIC was so important. And the slide that I'm showing now talks about the key drivers for indoor location. And at a high level, what these drivers are is basically the public's changing utilization of cell phone technology. Everybody, I'm sure, on this call is aware of the slow but sure replacement of all wireline phones with cell phones, the ever-increasing utilization of cell phones as the primary line or as the only line for many people, especially younger people. And you can see here that at this point, 60% of all the wireless calls that are being made inside, that on average, Americans spend 80% of their time in building, and that at this, at the time that this snapshot was taken, 25% of all U.S. homes no longer carry a landline phone, and that those percentages are increasing very quickly. So obviously the FCC is aware of this, the general community is aware of this, and I think it was these trends that drove the focus towards the need for an understanding of the indoor location environment. Now, the FCC, in its work, and I'm going to go through these slides quickly so I can just talk to all of it, has, since the E911 location mandate was put in the late 90s, has been looking at constantly evolving the regulations and trying to drive better and better accuracy and better capability into the location technologies that are being used. And what this slide shows is sort of a timeline of how we got to where we are now and what we currently know about where things are going. So in the late 90s, when the first 911 mandate was put out, there were two basic technology types. There was handset-based technologies predominated by AGPS or satellite-based location, and there were network-based technologies which the function of the data collection and the location exercise existed within the carrier network, rather than within the handset, and these technologies are all basically terrestrial technologies. And because the technologies had different capabilities in the 90s, different metrics were set by the FCC for the two different types of technologies. Now, over time, what the FCC has tried to do is to further tighten the requirements for location in a staged manner. So you see in 2010, they put out a notice of proposed rulemaking and moved from a network-wide assessment of location accuracy, where carriers were able to use statistics and take areas where their technologies performed less well and use those to bolster up areas where they performed better. So that beginning has begun to be pushed out of the capability on the location side. And the next step, which we're all working on now, is towards a unified mandate where the FCC will no longer look at any technologies, and that the same metrics will be required across the board for whatever technology is deployed. Now, what this implies, and what I suspect you'll hear when Greg gets up and starts talking, and what is in fact the case definitionally with what NextNav is utilizing and what Qualcomm utilizes, is the idea of a hybrid technology that incorporates both terrestrial components, or the more traditional network-based technology components, as well as some satellite-based technology like AGPS or GNSS as that evolves. And I think as we move forward with CSRIC, as the FCC moves forward, I think what you're going to find, and one of the questions that Alan talked about earlier was who will win. I think what you'll find is what we will have less than winners will be marriages, because the various technologies that we're talking about will work in concert with one another. And I believe what we will see across the board will be some set of technologies that are used to provide consistent location across all environments, both indoor and outdoor. So as the FCC began to work on trying to tighten the regulations in a general sense, and based on the trends that I talked about in an earlier slide, one of the things the FCC was very interested in is finding out what our capability was indoor, and from their perspective, were we ready to have the FCC begin to mandate accuracy and location requirements in the indoor environment as well as the outdoor. And I think in a very, very good move by the FCC and by the industry in general, the FCC came to CSRIC and asked for recommendations about indoor location. I believe their thoughts at the time would be that CSRIC would be able to give them numbers. But CSRIC wisely looked at the picture, and to the comment that Khaled had made earlier, determined that we don't have the data to base any answers on. We don't have the data to be able to provide the FCC with set numbers for what type of regulatory requirements could be put in place for the indoor environment. And CSRIC backed up and said we need to begin to test, and ideally we should have an objective area where all the vendor claims go away and we test technologies in a very scientific manner, in a very consistent manner, and can come up with reliable, objective numbers that we can now base decisions made by the FCC, but also decisions made by carriers and others in the community in terms of where we are and how best to go forward. And I think that this discussion and this test bed that was performed is really the first step to that. So I'll spend a little time talking about the trial, but obviously Khaled talked in much better detail, so I won't spend too much time, especially given the time constraints we have at this point. But I would encourage, as he did, the attendees of this to spend more time with the actual report, dig through it. There's a wealth of information there, not only on the environments and the way the tests were conducted, but more importantly on how a test of this sort needs to be done in order to ensure statistical validity and objectivity. So the test was run roughly between the holidays, between November 15th and December 31st of last year. It covered, to the point Khalid made, all of the morphologies, if you will, urban, suburban, rural. The Bay Area was chosen because a lot of us have presences in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has the ability to replicate a lot of these different environments in a very tight geographical area, because obviously there's windshield time and a lot of time and logistics in this testing. So this is sort of the high level on the test. Now I'm going to move to the general configuration for our technology within a network. Khalid mentioned the fact that we were not actually fully integrated into the carrier networks. In our particular case, that was an unfortunate circumstance because as a network-based technology, we derive most of our data from the network itself, and we have found that when we are fully deployed and integrated in the carrier's network, we have much better reliability and performance. But this test bed was done in a very accelerated manner, so we had to move very quickly. Our interfaces that are showing here in this architectural diagram are all standard interfaces that are used for all network-based technologies, and there are a few others that have been deployed and have been working in the field for many years, like ours has been. I'm going to pass over the diagram for dense urban. This can be shown in the report. It just shows the area where the dense urban test points were. These are our results for dense urban, and you will see that Polaris added a commentary, I believe it's section 742 of the report. Each of the vendors did to talk about their experience and what they saw in the test. I think for us the most important one is the dense urban environment, where we do perform exceptionally well. What we did find, and I talked earlier about integration, was that since the technology had not been integrated, we saw test points come in specific to the upper floors of the buildings that came from across the bay and caused some problem because we didn't integrate them into our system. We only integrated the area that was in the test bed. So these numbers are in the report, as well as the higher level numbers, the summary numbers that I believe Ganesh had shown. And it shows very good. I think the benchmarks that we talked about, that Ganesh had talked about, I think clearly we are at the 50-meter level in terms of what we can provide. I'll pass over these. In terms of what we can provide. But I think, and one of the points I want to make, because I'm going to try and go fairly quickly here, is that there are technical solutions, and we have seen here that certainly we have 3 technical solutions that performed very well in this trial. I believe we have many others that will be incorporated in the next set of trials. But I think what we need to consider is the technical solutions require changes to our behavior, sometimes to the systems. And one of the important things is with some of these technologies which show great promise, there are changes necessary to the handsets. And the time to get the changes made in the handsets and then to deploy the handsets and have them become a significant percentage of the overall population is not insignificant. And I think as we move forward, I believe that will be the area where we're going to be challenged. And I would use as a for example the vertical location that we've talked about, the floor level information. I believe NextNav showed very well that with sensors in the handsets we can do very well in getting high accuracy vertical location. But if you think about the problem in a larger sense, I believe that while that accomplishment is a very good one and hopefully one that we can leverage on, I think it only solves the very beginning of the problem, because when we worked with the public safety community, and one of the things I'd mentioned in the past is what they're looking for is not really a height. What they need is a floor. And telling them someone is 185 meters above ground level is not actionable information. So I think us collectively within this community developing the technology and working with the technology is one piece of the puzzle. But obviously, to the example that I just talked about, you would need building floor plans or some sort of a database that once you had the height, you could then translate to floor. And I suspect that when Greg gets up, he'll talk about Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi access points potentially being tied to specific floors. I think the point that I want to make is just that there are a lot of solutions and a lot of technologies here. We have found from this trial that they can perform very well, but we need to be aware that there are other obstacles before we can realize the benefits of some of these technologies. So I talked about vertical accuracy and the impact that it has to the response time. And we also talked in the group about the general the horizontal accuracy and what 50 meters meant. And obviously for public safety in a 911 environment, they want to go right to the door. As mentioned here, none of these technologies were able to get you quite to that point in a consistent manner. However, I think clearly if you look at where we were when 911 was first implemented, we've made great strides. We now have, in my mind, a benchmark that we can use to build on, and we have a mechanism to bring in new technologies, to test them, and to see to what extent we can make gains against what we've shown in this initial trial. So with that, and with the time, I'll wrap up and hand back to you, Alan.
Thanks very much, Norm. We'll move now to Greg Turetsky from CSR. And for those of you in the audience, if you haven't already read it, Greg wrote a column in the April issue of GPS World talking in a general way about these trials, but more talking about carrying forward the test bed for future trials. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Greg. Greg Turetsky, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. I'll be quick. Many of you have probably read the article. A lot of the slides that I have put together have been done in other public presentations. So I think I'll try to get through as quickly as possible so we have a little time left for questions. I think most of you know who CSR is. It's the merged into CSR in 2009. And we are currently engaged mostly in GPS, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi technologies across a wide range of products. The reason we got involved in the CSRIC trials, we came a little bit late to the party, was some work we had shown with our Surf Fusion capability where we were integrating GPS, Wi-Fi, and MEMS technology on Google Maps for indoor positioning. And that was obviously of interest to the FCC. We also showed some results that we had collected in places like that had no GPS at all, such as the Tokyo Station in Japan. So based on this, we were asked to join the CSRIC to kind of represent what we had talked about, which was how do we leverage these LBS services that are available commercially on things like Google Maps? How do you get a consumer to be able to have, who has that experience in his commercial usage, how can you bring that into the E911 community? And there's clearly a lot of issues beyond the technology ones that are associated with that, and many of those came up over the course of the CSRIC. So we joined in January, and this was our goal. The other thing we brought to the table a little bit was we had been very involved in the light squared kind of testing, and so we wanted to make sure that we had the same methodology in place, which was we want to get data that everyone in the CSRIC agreed to so that the data itself was unassailable. The interpretation of that data, what it means for the future and how it should be interpreted, is something everybody will always disagree on, but we really wanted to make sure there was a sound scientific basis for the data collected and that it was representative of the various technologies that were in play. In the end, or I should probably say in the middle, we decided to withdraw from participating. As we had stated, the issue we had was that the test procedures that were being used weren't really compatible with the way that our software was designed to operate. Our software operates in kind of a continuous operation mode, the way you would if you were using Google Maps. E911 obviously doesn't operate that way. It's a single point fix, and the way the test procedures were done in order to be able to test all these different technologies and all these different capabilities in so many different environments that Khaled had to deal with, it just wasn't going to allow us to be able to do that. We had to be able to do multiple trials at a single point with not a lot of information carried over from point to point. That kind of defeats the purpose of using a DR-like solution. And the testbed obviously needed to have some level of anonymity to it, and therefore there was no prior knowledge of what the test points were. So using a crowdsourced Wi-Fi database was not going to be effective either. So the results would have looked similar to just AGNSS only with a default database, and we decided that was relatively similar to what Qualcomm was already testing, and therefore there didn't seem to be much point in trying to cram this into the existing setup. So we chose to work hard to make sure that the testbed would continue, because we think it's a very good idea, and we think there's a lot of other technologies that will be brought to bear, and we want to make sure there's a way to go back and compare what's new with what's already been done without having to go through the entire process. So the report is a great report. The quality of the data is absolutely outstanding. I think both the vendors and the test group did a great job in making sure that the quality of the data is absolutely unassailable. We have a methodology now that allows for apples-to-apples comparison between very different technologies over a very wide range of test conditions. So we have a basis for being able to make recommendations. We've also shown that this indoor location is a solvable problem, that there technology exists today to get very high yield with reasonable accuracy. And it also showed that these different technologies have different performance in different environments, which is kind of what we all expected. And therefore, we expect this performance to continue to improve. We now have a way to baseline what we've done and what improvements we might make, and to look at how we might hybridize these technologies that obviously have advantages and disadvantages in different areas, because the goal of this testing is to improve public safety so that people who make 911 calls can get the help that they need as quickly as possible. So I think the things that we want to make sure are thought about when we move forward is how do we really take advantage of this change in operating mode of smartphones that's very different than when phones were put in place in 2000. So today, location is often available continuously in many phones. Lots of applications are constantly updating their location for things like Facebook check-ins. The other thing is, in the old days, GNSS power consumption was massive, and if you turned your receiver on, then you would drain your battery very quickly. In today's phones, there are lots of methods that are being employed such that that position can be updated continuously at a very low current draw in kind of a background methodology. And there's other sources of location technology already in our phones today besides just GPS and the network, Wi-Fi and MEMS being kind of tops among them. And so there are some really important questions to consider when we do this. So when a user dials 911, what really should happen? Should the existing location just be used right away, made available through an API, but how and whether or not that location can be trusted versus starting a dedicated location determination session that's controlled by the operator? And this gets into not so much the technology side, but into kind of the business and the policy side of if the operator is being required to support an E911, then the operator has to know exactly how that location was determined. And this brings up a number of different questions around hybridization and methodologies for bringing different technologies together, which is, can you really trust it, right? How does the operator get a QoS that can be used to determine uncertainty when there are different handsets with different technologies coming together? And how do those test procedures that we would use have to change in order to be able to validate performance? The carriers can't be out testing every different handset in every different possible configuration in order to show compliance with 911. So it's a pretty difficult job, and I think in the end, one of the things that came out of this report that we are presenting to the FCC is this initial concept, which was, gee, how come a consumer can see his location on Google Maps indoors very accurately? How come we can't get that to an E911 operator? And it turns out the answer is there's a lot of reasons why we can't do that, and not all of them are technical. So I think the CSRIC going forward, when CSRIC 4 gets going, I think we're going to be looking at a lot of those things beyond just the pure technology aspects, and trying to figure out how we actually bring public safety actionable information into the E911 framework, which is a very different framework than commercial LBS. So with that, I'd like to hear your questions and see if we can help you guys out a little bit.
All right. Thanks very much, Greg. For everyone in the audience, I want to thank you for your patience. We've held with the attendance level, showing the compelling nature of this information and the interest it has for GNSS going forward. We are not going to do a question and answer period over the air. However, I'm going to circulate all the questions that have come in among our 4 speakers and collect their written responses over the next few weeks, and we will present this either in a future issue of GPS World magazine or in one of the newsletters, most probably my GNSS design and test newsletter coming up fairly shortly. I want to remind everyone that in the top left of your screen, for about another minute at least, there is a way for you to download the CSRIC report. If you look at in the upper left, you'll see something that says "Read the report," and then there's a URL. You can get the report. Now, a number of questions have come in, people asking for the second report, the LBS report. I'm going to give you that information right now. The URL is quite long on the FCC site, but here's a shortcut. Go to gpsworld.com, and when you get there, you'll see across the very top of your page a white navigation bar, and in it there is the word Opinions. If you click on Opinions, you will get a pull-down menu. Expert Advice and Leadership Talks is the one you want to click. When you click on that, you will go to another page, and the first thing you'll see is Expert Advice Setting Standards for Indoor Position by, what do you know, by Greg Turetsky. If you scroll down in his column, once you click on that and go to his column, you will see there are 2 live links, both for the indoor location testbed report, the one we've already been talking about, and a second one, Leveraging LBS and Emerging Location Technologies for Indoor Wireless E911 report. That's gpsworld.com. Go to the Opinions page, go to Greg Turetsky's piece, and you'll find it. I'm going to close the webinar now. Again, we will return to your questions in written form, probably in a digital format, possibly in the magazine. I want to thank all of our speakers for their time. I want to thank you, the audience, for your patience through our technical hiccup. This is compelling information. I'm glad we were able to share it all with you. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Hemisphere GNSS, and we look forward to welcoming you again at a GNSS webinar next month. The topic in May will be signal simulation. Thanks very much. Bethany, any final words for our audience?
Thank you for attending today's webinar. Please check back at gpsworld.com/webinars for the upcoming webinar Alan just referenced. And keep a lookout in your inboxes. 2 weeks from now, you'll be receiving the on-demand link to today's presentation. Thank you, and have a nice afternoon.